Okay, hello everybody. It is Friday today, and that means it's another episode of Echoes of Fear. I am your co-host, Kenton J. Moore, and I'm here today with no one. Ha! I am all by myself. You are listening to my very first solo Echoes of Fear podcast. My co-host Jason Hewlett is away doing awesome and epic things, making cool documentaries on supernatural and other different types of phenomena. So I am here recording today's episode by my lonesome, which is kind of funny because today's topic on the Echoes of Fear podcast is autophobia, which is the fear of being alone. All by myself. Don't worry, I won't be doing that a lot tonight. I'm not going to sing for you. So we're going to talk about autophobia, which is a phobia that it's specifically, a severe and irrational fear of being alone. Like, not to be confused, obviously, with social anxieties and, different anxieties about being by yourself, like agoraphobia or other things like that. Autophobia, sometimes referred to as monophobia, specifically is the severe and irrational fear of being left alone, being isolated, being by yourself. Now, what's interesting is this fear is, you'd think it's pretty common. I mean, humans by nature are extremely social creatures. We like to be in groups. We like to be around other humans. I mean, I can't say that I feel the same when it comes to the holidays. I definitely don't exactly like being around a lot of people this time of year. You can only get hit by a cart in the ankle so many times. So I look forward to being alone. But for someone who might suffer this phobia, they could have severe panic attacks. They could have different types of anxieties or inabilities. Even just the thought of being left alone might scare them. In the DSM-5, again, it doesn't list these specifically. It just lists them as specific phobias. And specific phobias occur between 9.4 and 12.5% of the United States. So we're talking like 19 million people in America alone would have these types of a specific phobia, which could be like fear of spiders. It could be, fear of snow, like we went over earlier this season. It could be agoraphobia, fear of crowds, fear of teenagers. That's something we were talking about wanting to maybe go over in a future episode. But this one is the fear of being left alone. And even the thought of being isolated or left alone or abandoned in some way, shape, or form would cause these panic attacks, these anxiety attacks and everything. Now, it's kind of interesting when you think about it in terms of the pop culture references, which is, normally where, Jason, who would say, oh, yeah, like that one movie. That's my best Jason impression, which was horrible, by the way. Sorry, Jason. But when I was thinking about this one, I was thinking, well, how many movies do I know of right off the top of my head that feature heavily themes of isolation, themes of being left alone, that are fear-driven or really delve into that psychology of what happens when you are abandoned or so isolated, and off the top of my head, the first one I could think of was Liam Neeson's movie, The Grey, where he's in the snow by himself being hunted by the wolves. And I realized it's not a great example because I don't really remember a lot about that movie. Again, wish Jason was here to chime in about it, ping off me a little bit. All I really remember was the fight against him against the alpha at the end when he was tying all the bottles to his knuckles and getting ready to go punchy punch with a giant wolf. But Castaway with Tom Hanks, that was a great example that came up, and that one really does delve into that psychology of isolation. What happens when you're left completely alone? And, like with Wilson, I mean, he created a companion for himself by painting faces on a tennis ball, or not a tennis ball, it was a volleyball, wasn't it? Volleyball. So, he had to find companionship in his isolation. And that's a great point to think of. If somebody's suffering this kind of fear, it's going to be almost like separation anxiety with a dog. They're going to do whatever they can to ensure that they're never left alone, that, people are going to be there for them, and in seeking to understand how some of this might go for somebody, I came across some articles from 2008 and otherwise that talked a lot about the science behind it, some of the research and things that were done. And they found that people that suffer autophobia or monophobia, it tends to be one of the most severe phobias in terms of how it affects people's lives, their relationships with others, their jobs, so on and so forth. Like you think about a person who suffers this kind of fear, and you imagine them getting sent away on a task by themselves. In myself, as an example, when I was in the Navy, we used to come into a foreign port, and the ship would rent a handful of cars. And those of us that had driver's licenses and had proven ourselves would be put in the responsibility of using said cars to go do shopping for the ship. Well, 9 times out of 10, there was people that just wanted to tag along for the ride because they wanted to go shopping too, and they thought it would be really fun and it would save them money on taxis or whatever. But most of the time you did that by yourself. So you were in foreign places, driving a vehicle by yourself. And I have experience on the roads in San Francisco. I've driven across the Golden Gate Bridge. I've driven Sydney, Australia, where you were on the other side of the car and the other side of the road. Like those kind of things can be pretty alien. I mean, so far, those 2 examples, at least everybody's speaking English. But there has been places where we've been in completely foreign places. And that is another type of isolation. Isolation doesn't necessarily have to mean that you are physically left alone, like Castaway or Moon, for example, the movie with the astronaut up on the moon that went kind of squirrely up there because he was left alone for so long. It doesn't necessarily have to be that extreme. It can be more along the lines of, are you isolated amongst your peers? Are you isolated in a foreign place where you can't speak the language or exist in a basic fashion because of a cultural difference or some sort of other barrier to living your life as it normally might be? So when you think in terms of those kind of things, you can really start to understand how this would really be a severe effect on your life. But that being said, it not being in the DSM-5 and not having a whole lot of data on it means that there's just not a whole lot of understanding out there about what it may or may not actually do to somebody. Because I think in the world that we live in now with social media, digital stuff, I know people who never, or at least go days and days and days without physically seeing another person face to face. But that doesn't, in even the most remote way, mean that they are alone, because they're, playing online games. They're FaceTiming their friends. They're talking to their boyfriend over the phone who may live in another country. And that's really interesting too. But there's also emotional isolation, which is yet another really interesting aspect of all of this. So the further you dig into it, the more really what you need to understand about autophobia and its effect on people is literally just, what does isolation actually mean? What does it actually mean to be alone? Could you be in an abusive relationship where you're literally left alone by the other person caring or not caring about you or what you want? Could it be having a circle of friends that you no longer really have the same alignment with. Maybe you've grown up or found different interests and you've changed, right? Robin Williams once said, and he was one of my favorite actors of all time, but he once said that one of the most difficult things he can imagine is being surrounded by people and still feeling alone. I mean, he was talking about his depression and stuff when he said it, but I can see that. Like I could really understand that. I've had times when I was on a ship with 340 people in the middle of the ocean and I felt just nothing. Like I felt like I had nobody around to talk to. I felt lost in the darkness, just because maybe I was going through something and I didn't know anybody that would understand, or maybe I didn't want to burden any of my coworkers with what I was feeling. So that kind of isolation can be a trigger for these fears and stuff as well. And that made me think too about, characters in comic books and pop culture like Superman, right? I mean, Superman had his parents from Smallville and Kansas and all that. And he has Lois Lane and he has the Justice League and he has friends and everything, but he's the last surviving member of his species, I mean, that's got to be lonely. That would be a very difficult thing to live with, I think. But I mean, the guy can fly and stop bullets and shoot lasers out of his eyes, so I'm pretty sure he's got ways to make up for that. So I don't think it's necessarily the greatest example to use him, but you think about it. Think for a second, everybody who's out there listening. Like, imagine the most lonely you've ever felt in your life. What were you doing? Like, what happened for you to feel that lonely? Were you lost in the woods? Was your car broken down on a quiet highway? Was it something less extreme? Like, were you in a relationship where you just never felt heard? What is the thing that you've experienced that made you feel the most alone? Now imagine that, but imagine being uncontrollably and severely terrified of experiencing that again. In doing that exercise, I thought back in my childhood. I remember a time when my brother and I were very young. I don't think we were 10 years old yet. And we were with my mom and her friend, Neil, at the time. And we were driving up to some lake. I think we were going fishing. And of course, my brother and I were being rambunctious. We're not listening. We're making lots of noise. We're jumping up and down in the car. Just, for lack of a better word, we're being a pair of little shits, And my mom finally had enough. And she, bless her heart, was and still is a very strict woman. She's a strict woman. And they stopped the car and they kicked my brother and I out. Now Kyler was with me. I wasn't alone. I was not by myself. I wasn't isolated, but we stood there on a dirt road for all intents and purposes in the middle of nowhere because we were less than 10. We didn't know where we were, and we watched them drive away. And for all of you out there, you might be thinking, oh my God, that's harsh. How could you do that to kids? Well, she's not that harsh. She knew that there was a corner coming up. We were literally a quarter of a mile away from, I think we were on the other end of a hayfield from someone's farm that they knew. So all they did was drive around the corner and wait. Now they thought that we were going to be smart enough to follow the road, and they just waited and waited to see if we would, come around the corner. But of course, my brother and I were bawling our eyes out. We think we're abandoned in the middle of nowhere. We didn't know what else to do. So we went off the road and started walking straight across the field. And then of course my mom panicked because she's like, oh my God, where are the kids? And came back to try to find us. And as the story goes, apparently there was a bear. And anyways, they found us. It was okay. But I remember my mom coming over a hill. And I remember this memory clear as day. I remember my mom coming over a hill and she was calling our names and I was yelling out to her, but my voice had gone so hoarse that I couldn't even make any noise. So I was like a debarked chihuahua, just bam, bam. And she was right there and couldn't hear me. And I remember right now, to this day, at 45 years of age, what it felt like when she turned her head and made eye contact with us, right? So that was my story. That's the most alone I've ever felt in my life, the most abandoned I've ever felt in my life in terms of trauma, right? I mean, I got over it and I learned my damn lesson. I've never been a shit in a car again. I'll tell you that right now, and, I think like Kyler and I, we really learned from it, and I can't say anything bad. My mom's not abusive. She's a wonderful woman. I like to think she raised really good kids. I mean, we're both, fairly successful people, him way more so than me, but younger brother, right? Always the case. And so, like in seeking to understand, like I can imagine, I can empathize with this one. I really can. And when I talked to Jason, before recording this episode and we were trying to schedule things and it wasn't working out and I was busy and he was busy and, I got a new podcast coming up. He's got all these other projects. I'm trying to get a new book out for next year. So we were trying to do the scheduling and it just didn't work out. And then I said, well, I tell you what, man, like I want you to succeed. I love the stuff that you're doing. Why don't I try to do this one solo? Hopefully the listeners will like it. And me rambling on about fear is enough to keep people engaged. But I got to tell you, I was scared. And I thought, how appropriate that that the topic on the chart was this fear of being alone, because I was scared of doing this podcast alone. I was questioning whether or not I could keep everybody interested. I was questioning whether or not I had it in me to talk about fear by myself for, 15 or 20 minutes or whatever. And, obviously, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is feeling fear and doing it anyway. So that's what I chose to do. And here I am. I'm doing the episode and everything's good. But I got to tell you, man, between being scared to do this episode by myself and being going back into the memory banks and digging up that gem from my childhood, I can really get my teeth into this one. I really do think that there is a lot that could be said for it. And I think that it's probably a lot more prevalent than we think it is because, as I mentioned, there's probably a ton of people out there who are alone, but, all they have to do is wake up in the middle of the night and reach for their cell phone. And that's just it. So even if they have the autophobia, even if they do suffer the negative consequences, even if they do have these panic attacks and these fears of being left alone, I am betting you that they don't ever feel the need to actually talk to anybody about it because they have a network already of some semblance of a network anyways, if you think about the movie Her, I mean, that guy, I can't remember who played in it. I want to say it was Joaquin Phoenix. It's the one where he falls in love with Siri, basically, on his phone. There you go. There's another one. I mean, maybe that's all it takes is a voice in the dark to make these people, make somebody like that feel better about themselves. Naked and Afraid, the TV show. I mean, that's the entire premise of it is to be isolated in the middle of nowhere and see who can cope. Now, that all being said, I do know a handful of people that they would pay money to be allowed to do something like that, to drop all their responsibilities and just disappear from society alone in the wilderness, growing Grizzly Adams beards and butchering their own food. I know a lot of people who would want to do that. But I know a lot of people that wouldn't, these 15-minute cities that you hear everybody talking about where everybody's jammed in like sardines and everything you could possibly need to live the perfect human existence is within 15 minutes. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a wives' tale, but who knows? Maybe there's something to it. And there are people out there who probably love to feel that way. But I like to think that the people who have a measure of autophobia, who have a measure of being afraid to be alone, are people who jump from relationship to relationship. Serial, what is it? Serial monogamist? Is that the term for it? I'm not sure. Somebody correct me. Hopefully, if you're out there, just comment on this and tell me if I'm wrong. The people who jump from relationship to relationship, people who go to clubs all the time, even if it's just to sit at a desk and be around all the people. People who go to festivals, mall rats. There's a perfect example. I mean, that is a person, somebody who goes to a mall and just hangs out at a mall all day. That's a person who wants to be around a ton of people. Like maybe that's the energy makes them feel safe, and when I was doing my research, I read this really interesting segment on one of the bottoms of the papers that said that, in terms of triggers, like what could have caused someone to develop autophobia over time. They said that, one of the common triggers could be maybe the individual has a condition like, say, diabetes or epilepsy. And maybe at one point in their life, they suffered a severe event where nobody was there to help them. And now they're afraid of having that happen again. There's just so many angles to explore this one and to think about it. And in terms of like pop culture and everything like that, I mean, God, when you really start going down the rabbit hole, books, movies, video games, TV shows, I mean, there is a absolute ton of pop culture material that plays on this psychology of isolation and being alone. Video games right off the top of my head, Subnautica, right? I mean, you're literally crash landed on a water planet in the middle of nowhere, and the ship that he brought you there is having a nuclear engine meltdown, and away you go. Silent Hill 2. I mean, that movie made me afraid of fog and air sirens. I'll just tell you that right now. But there's another great example, Alone in the Dark, Alan Wake. I mean, there's all these movies where you literally are some person fighting against impossible things alone by yourself in isolation. And it's everywhere. It's prevalent, right? We are a species of community. It's one of the pillars of human requirements, right? You need shelter, you need food, you need water, and you need community. So, of course, there's going to be a phobia of being left alone. So, anyways, I'm just looking at the time here, and we're getting pretty close to like 23, 24 minutes. So, yeah, I did it. I mean, whoop, whoop. It's going to be a slightly shorter episode just because I don't want to keep yakking your ears off. I've made all the points I wanted to make. And at this point now, it's just going to be me rambling. But yeah, there we go. Ladies and gentlemen, my very first solo podcast. Sadly, I really do find that I miss Jason. We have a rapport, and it's so much nicer to do a podcast when I have somebody to bang things off of, well, I guess that sounds really bad. Oh, that sounds bad. I'm sorry, Jason. And maybe it's best I be alone. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. This has been Kenton J. Moore on Echoes of Fear, talking about autophobia. And we will talk to you next week for more fear, 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 fear. Jason's way better at that.